We're beginning, today is June 3rd, and this course is called Exploring Jewish Views of the Afterlife, Contemporary, Traditional and Contemporary Perspectives. And this is the first of a three-part class through Tikshoret, and I'm Simcha Raphael, and I want to welcome you all here. And what I'm going to do is share something with you to start that goes like this. Hang on. Okay, here we are. Back. Okay, so this is where what we're doing. This is the title of the class, and this is. Hang on, and I got it to get it to. Oh, it's not being friendly to me. Okay, this is the three parts that we're going to do. Today we're going to look at afterlife in biblical and rabbinic tradition. Sheol and Olam Haba are the terms that are going to emerge in our conversation. In a week, we're going to travel to Tzfat, and we're going to ask the Kabbalists, and we're going to ask the later the Hasidic masters what they had to say about life after death. And then in 2 weeks, we're going to raise the question, not what, as in what does Judaism have to say about life after death, but so what? So what do we do with that? How does that change the way in which we think about death and dying and grief and bereavement? So that's the Tochnit, that's the map. So I want to ask you to unmute yourself, because I love the cacophony of sounds that comes when we say the bracha for Torah study. But before we say it, it's traditional to dedicate our study to neshamas, to beings on the other side who have made the transition. Today is my mother's birthday. She's been in the other world for almost 9 years. So I want to invite you to, who is it that you want to hold in your heart? Who is it that you want to say, hey, I'm thinking of you, and may the merit of our study be on your karmic record on the other side, so wherever you're going, you can go higher and higher. So with that intention in your heart, join me as we say the bracha for Torah study, whether you want to read it in Hebrew or in transliteration. Baruch atah And I want to invite you back to mute yourself, but say thank you very much, God, for this cacophony of sounds. And as my colleague and friend Arthur Waskow would say, Holy One of Blessing, thank you for this opportunity to soak in the words of Torah. Okay, so I want to tell you a story. I want to tell you how I got into this, and this is also a non-paid, non-political announcement for my book. But here's the story. You see this guy on the right side of the screen. So I was in my early 20s, and my closest friend at the time was killed in a car accident. And you know, I was with him one day, and I was getting ready to go to his funeral the next day. He was like, you know, it was one of those moments in a life where the life comes and the life goes very quickly. And very early on, I felt a sense of his presence. He showed up to me in a dream. We were sitting in the Shiva house, and somebody said, hey, didn't it feel like he was just in the room? Like I was having this sense of feeling his presence very early on. But when I began to look about what Judaism had to say on life after death, there was almost nothing available. This was the early or mid 70s. Maurice Lamb had a book called The Jewish Way in Death and Mourning. You know, there was one book out. Hang on, I'm trying to go back to see you. So give me a second. I'm trying to get my technology very efficient here. So there was a book by Jack Reamer on Jewish reflections on death, but there was very little out there about life after death. And it's a long story, but eventually Reb Zalman guided me into doing some doctoral dissertation work on afterlife, and then it later became a book. And I never imagined when I wrote this book that it would go into a 25th anniversary edition. Okay, so basically, I have had the good fortune of being able to help shift the baseline in Jewish tradition with regard to dying and death. So what we're going to do is today we're going to look at death and dying in biblical tradition. Deborah, you putting your hand up? Are you asking a question? Are you?
I'm sorry, but I'm hearing impaired. I'm using hearing aids. There is someone who's not muted or more than one person, and it's making me crazy.
Good.
I'm sorry to be so
Thank
difficult.
you very much. Please send me texts if there's any problems. Please be sure that you're muted, and I'm gonna invite some conversation as we go along. But thank you very much. And wave to me or send me a text. I don't always see everybody at the same time, so I'm doing the best I can. We have a wonderful and robust gathering. Oh wait, there's 3 more people coming in. 1, 2, 3. Okay, so for those folks who are just joining us, we're already in the middle, and we're just getting going. So here I get the first question. Okay, I have the mute button, but I get to ask the first question. So what I want to ask you, what did you learn about life after death in Judaism? Tell me. Oh my God! Nobody can talk. I mean, these are renewal affiliated people. You've studied Torah, you've studied Kabbalah. I see some of you work with Chaya. What did you learn about afterlife?
Well, actually, I've learned it from you. That
doesn't count. No, I want to know the 1.0 version, not the 2.0. I want to know what you were taught growing up, what you learned. Yeah.
Nothing. I didn't learn anything.
Yeah,
I did. I can remember what I learned as a kid.
Yeah.
I remember that there was this idea of reincarnation of souls, and it was going to happen when Mashiach came. There was this Gilgul. I think I even learned Gilgulim, and that the souls were going to arise starting at the Mount of Olives in Jerusalem. And if you went to Israel and got at some earth and brought it home, I don't know if I learned this part when I was young, but you could put it in a gravesite, and underground the person would roll to Jerusalem and like reincarnate. And it flipped me out. I'm like, what do they look like? So
resurrection. So resurrection is in there, and they still put in earth in the casket. And if you're buried in New Jersey, they'll put in a little popsicle stick or a twig so you can dig through the earth. But what happens to Joe and Jane Jew after death? Nobody tells you that. What else? One other comment, and then if you learned nothing, then I have nothing to say about the topic. Joni Abramson.
So I grew up in a combination Reform Orthodox family in the Midwest, and I learned that you go from dust to dust, that there's no life after this life, and you live on in the deeds or in people who remember you, which so none of that was very comforting.
Some of you got a variation on this one. Judaism celebrates life and the living. It dwells on life here rather than on the hereafter, as other religious faiths do, meaning if Christians believe in it, Jews don't. Life is precious here and now. Or on the bottom of, dead is dead, what lives on are the children and the legacy of good works. Right. Am I reading you correctly?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So here's what I need to tell you. I need to tell you that, first of all, that I'm going to try to go from my pictures to being able to see you all. So you'll forgive me. I'm trying to not be clumsy about it. I'm getting a little more Zoom efficient. Here's what I know some of you are teachers. What you need to say to people, my teacher Reb Zalman would say, I don't only want to give you a fish, I want to teach you how to fish. So I don't only want to talk to you about afterlife, I want to teach you how to teach others about afterlife.
Thank you.
I would say 85%, 90%, 92% of American Jews, North American Jews, for my friends in Canada, believe that Judaism doesn't have a belief in afterlife. Okay? Right. Whether you're in the Orthodox, Conservative, Reform, or I don't know where I am spectrum. Okay? And many people have bought into this sense that Judaism believes in the life and the living, the here and now. And a lot of Christians believe that. what you need to tell people is that is modern Judaism. That is not historically accurate. In the world of the Hasidic masters and the Kabbalists, in the world of Shalom Aleichem and Isaac Bashevis Singer, there was never any question about a survival of consciousness after death. They didn't sit around, you'll excuse my Yiddish parody, say, Moshe, do you believe in afterlife? Well, Chaim, I'm not so sure. That was not their problem. That's modernity. That's Haskalah for those who need a translation. That's sort of the Jewish Enlightenment. That is the rationalism of the 20th century and also the impact of sort of classical Reform Judaism that try to make everything very prim and proper. So what we need to do is travel back in time. Okay, so today we're going to look at Tanakh and we're going to look at some text from rabbinic literature, and what it is even if I say some of you are well read in the Bible, are there texts? What does Torah have to say about life after death? Okay, so that's my job, is to show you some of that. A question or two. Anybody have? This is sort of the end of the first part, which is we believe in afterlife, but it's not accessible, and we need to go back and look at the traditional material with new eyes. Anybody have any comments or questions before we go back to our first, go forward to our first text? Yeah,
Could I
Helene,
ask a question?
go.
Yeah. I want to take one step back before we begin this, so thank you for the opportunity. I'm so interested in this course because I've wondered about this for years and years, and I thought, why does nobody teach this? And I think
tell me a question. If you're going to ask questions, I want you all to be precise, because we're yeah.
Can you say something about maybe the question is authority in Judaism? So if we study and we learn that this is what the Kabbalists say and this is what this, then does Judaism say, well, then you're just free to decide which of these you want to pull out? Or is there anything official? Or, how do we say this is what Judaism teaches?
Let me answer this. This is a good question, and it'll circle back more than once in this class. But let me say it like this. The rabbis, who really are the authority voices, okay, in Judaism, they did not have to standardize belief. They had to standardize practice. They had to know that the Jews who were in Babylonia and the Jews who were in what was then Palestine and the Jews who were later in south of Spain lit Shabbos candles at the same time relative to the setting of the sun, or read the book of Esther relative to the cycle of the moon. So there was a lot of room for what I would call midrashic improvisation, okay? And even though Maimonides has 13 articles of faith, there's not a lot of doxology. And let me say this about this course. I'm not selling belief. I will sell you my book, by the way, if you want, okay? But I'm not selling belief. I want to say this is what our tradition has to say, and it's up to you to do your own meaning making around dying and death. So with that, I want to invite.
You're
muted.
Button.
Seems to be muted.
We can't hear you.
Okay, I'll go back to my screen share and you go back to your unmuting and we'll go next. Okay, I'm going to read this. Shoshana, are you there? Where's Shoshana? Are you on? I don't see you. I want to know.
I'm here. I'm here. I'll wait.
Will you be my reader today?
Okay.
Okay. So you and I will jam. Okay. If you get tired, I'll replace you. But I want you to read what's on the screen. Let me tell you where we are, and then Shoshana is going to read. So that way I can take a sip of water in between. Okay. We're going to the end of the book of Genesis. This is Jacob's deathbed scene. Okay, he gathers his whole mishpacha. They fly in from New York to Florida. The kid comes from California, and they're all gathered. And this is what he says. Go.
Then Yaakov gave them instructions.
I am about to be gathered to my people.
bury me with my fathers in the cave in the field of Ephron the
Yeah, a New
Hittite.
York accent. I never knew that.
In the field of Machpelah near Mamre in Canaan. You can GPS it. Which Abraham bought as a burial place from Ephron the Hittite for too much money. There, Abraham and his wife Sarah were buried. There, Yitzchak and his wife, you following? Rebecca
we're
were buried.
following.
And there I buried Leah. I buried Leah there. The field and the cave in it were bought from the Hittites. When Yaakov had finished giving his instructions to his sons, he drew his feet up into the bed, breathed his last, and was gathered to his people.
V'ye'esaf el amav. And in a second, I'm going to stop my screen share, but anybody want to explain what this has to do with life after death? Just jump in. Shoshana, you're red, you got your hand up, go.
Okay, well, I don't know if this is a piece of evidence for biblical belief in the survival of consciousness after death. However, Vayasaf Amav could mean that his bones would be dried and then put in an ossuary and then deposited in the family vault at Machpelah, and therefore he's literally gathered, his atzamot are literally gathered.
His bones.
But I don't know if they think.
Right. Well, let's say that's one of the
time.
options. Let's say that's one of the options. You see, I mean, this is sort of, I'm trying to do this deductively. I'm trying to make some sense of what we have in our legacy of Jewish tradition. But in the ancient world, to be alive, I had that before on the screen, was nefesh chaya, a living being. Okay, that's what they call a living person. To be dead was nefesh mate, a dead person. That's literally a living spirit and a dead. Hang on, just hold your question, Jane. Let me get this out. While you were alive, you were with the family clan. You remember, they were Bedouins. Jacob and Abraham and Isaac, they were Bedouins. They hung out with the leader of the clan and the wives and the kids and the goats and the camels in the family constellation. And when they died, they returned to the family constellation that was in the family tomb that was said to be underground. We can at least deduce that there was likelihood, some sense, and we have evidence from Israelite archaeology that they would go up to the tombs, they would drill holes and they would put in food stuff. They'd send you a nash for the journey on the way. Jane, you had your hand up. What's your?
Yes, well, I could relate what you just finished to this also, but I'm just thinking this last phrase, he was gathered to his people. To me, that really suggests a more mystical approach. It's very much in line with we were all standing at Sinai together. And so to me, it's about the soul. Your soul has always existed and always will exist.
And to bring in modern near-death experiences, what happens when people die? The hospice nurses are reporting that they're literally seeing their mother, their father, their brother. There's lots and lots of anecdotal evidence about that, and I'm going to do more stuff on that. I want to make sure that I don't leave you in Gehenna in rabbinic times, that I get to the end of my material. So let me go back and keep going on. Shoshana, I think you got the next one. Okay, here. So I need to take you now to the story of King Saul. King Saul is on the battlefield, about to lose his tuchus to the Philistines, and he had a mentor who was the prophet Samuel. Okay, when Samuel died, he felt very bereft, and he didn't have his spiritual counselor. You know, his therapist died. He had to go get another therapist, and seeing that his therapist, he didn't find a good replacement because all the therapists in New York were on vacation for the summer, he said, well, let me at least go dial 1-900-PSYCHIC. So that's what we're going to read in this next paragraph. Please.
And he had slaughtered a lot of the therapists. But
you're giving away the answer already. Go.
Okay. Now Samuel was dead, and all Israel had mourned for him and buried him in his own town of Ramah. Saul had expelled the mediums and spiritists, the Ovot and Yidonim, from the land. The Philistines assembled and came and set up camp at.
Go.
Set up camp. So the Philistines, the arch enemies, were at Shunem, while Saul gathered all the Israelites and set up camp at Gilboa. When Shaul saw the Philistine army, he was afraid. Terror filled his heart, and he inquired of Yudhe-Vavhe, but Yudhe-Vavhe did not answer in either dreams or Urim or prophets. Nada, nothing worked, no websites, nothing. He was cut off.
Now it's very interesting. What is it? What's this? What are the Urim? Shoshana, you know that.
I guess the Ouija board.
The Urim was an oracular device that the priest used.
Right. Oracle device.
It was what was in the Choshen.
Right. It was literally the breastplate was they would tune into the extraterrestrials, to the higher consciousness, or dreams or prophecy. Okay, so he basically is in trouble. All right, he doesn't know what to do. So here's what he does.
Saul then said to his attendants, "Find me a woman who is a medium, an Eshet Ba'alat Ov, so I may go and inquire of her. There is one in Endor." Well, you haven't killed, they said. So Saul disguised himself, putting on other clothes, and at night he and 2 men went to the woman. "Consult a spirit for me," he said, "and bring up for me the one I name."
Okay, and the story continues.
But you have to, okay. Then the woman asked, "Whom shall I bring up for you?" "Bring up Samuel," he said. When the woman saw Samuel, she cried out at the top of her voice and said to Saul, "Why have you deceived me? You are Saul." The king said to her, "Don't be afraid. What do you see?" The woman said, "I see a spirit coming up out of the ground." "What does he look like?" he asked. "An old man wearing a robe is coming up," she said. Then Saul knew it was Samuel, and he bowed down and prostrated himself, his face to the ground. Samuel said to Saul, "Why have you disturbed me by bringing me up?"
"What are you bothering me for?"
And Saul said, I'm in, shit trouble. I'm in great distress," said Saul. "The Philistines are fighting against me, and God has turned away from me. God no longer answers me either by prophets or by dreams. So I've called on you to tell me what to do."
Okay, so there's something very problematic in this text. What is it? He's sneaking in the middle of the night to go to see this woman we call the Witch of Endor. And he himself has condemned the spiritists and the mediums in the land. What's going on here? Anybody want to comment on this? First of all, is this an afterlife text?
Oh, yeah.
It certainly suggests that. There's an approach to religious studies called phenomenology, where we just look at the phenomena that are documented. And the phenomena that are documented here suggests that they may not think it's kosher, but they do think it's possible. Anyone want to comment on what's the problem with it being condemned?
It was his ego. He was afraid that if there were mediums and actually women with any kind of power who could see beyond the veil of just this world, that his power could be questioned. So he banished them, but then it's almost as if he actually knew they did have real power. So then he calls on them when he himself is in need.
It sounds like Jimmy Swaggart. But listen, I want to say you're accurate, and it's even more complex than that.
Can I add something?
Yeah.
He's not trusting in God. He's not letting God be in control. He's sort of trying to circumvent to know the outcome before it happens.
Well, God didn't respond to him. God, he didn't get prophecy. He didn't get the Urim. He didn't get dreams.
Well, he wasn't patient. I don't know.
Well,
He seems very desperate. He seems very desperate and scared. And this irony, like he didn't banish those witches and condemn them because they were false or unpowerful, but because they had power. And he's realizing like he doesn't want to own yet that he's the one who's upset the balance. And he's been his own stumbling block.
And I think the reason why that these women who communicated with the underworld of the dead, and the witch of Endor, by the way, is not a solo practitioner. It was known that there was a whole guild of women, and you were right. This was definitely the work of women who we would call today clairvoyants or psychics, and for some reason they were condemned. And here's what I want to continue the conversation about. It goes like this: the women who communicated with the underworld were also in communication with the goddess. The modern scholarship, Raphael Patai, says that 240 of the 360 years that the Jerusalem temple was standing, worship of the goddess was part of the official practice. And Shoshana, you want to read this, please? Okay, so this is from the book of Deuteronomy, and Deuteronomy is a later text. Deuteronomy is written in the 6th century, kind of rewriting some of what had happened historically. So please read this.
Yeah, Devarim Yudchet Yud to something. Let no one be found among you who sacrifices his son or daughter in the fire, who practices divination or sorcery, interprets omens, engages in witchcraft, or casts spells, or who is a medium or spiritist, or who consults the dead. V'shoel o v'yidoni v'doresh el hametim.
So those are 3 different kind of categories. Shoel ov is sort of like asking of spirits. Yidoni is sort of inner knowing types, and Doresh el hametim is literally a medium. Like some psychics are psychics and some psychics are mediums and some mediums are not psychics and that. So here's what we need to understand, that let me put it, I like to describe it in this way. The Declaration of Independence says, we behold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. And I don't have to belabor that point, that we're still working on that. It's over 200 years, it's 230 years or so, and we're still trying to make sure that all people are created equal. The equivalent of that, why am I talking about the Declaration of Independence, was the clarion call at Sinai. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall have no other gods before me. But Moses didn't come down from Sinai with OU tattooed on his pupik. Okay? Moses didn't automatically, even though he railed against the golden calf, which was really a return to Egyptian practices, the reality is that the monotheistic cry of Sinai took centuries to finally come into being. It was really revisionist history of Deuteronomy. So the connection between serving Yud-He Vav-He and not communicating with the dead, we also see that in, are there any Kohanim in the house? What are Kohanim not allowed to do? Those who are from the lineage of the Kohanim, what are they not allowed to do?
go into the cemetery or be near a dead body. Yeah.
Now that's very interesting. You want to serve Yud Hey Vav Hey? You can't hang out with the dead like those other women do. Okay, so what we have, part of the reason why we have a problem with afterlife in modern Jewish life is because there was biblical tradition had an ambivalence towards afterlife. It's not that there's no afterlife. It's not that there was yes afterlife. There was afterlife. There was a sense of consciousness surviving bodily death. And in the ancient world, part of it was condemned because it was problematic. Okay, I'm giving you a collage today. I want to answer questions and keep going, but one question and then Shoshana, wait, Cynthia has a question.
So I was thinking of, as you were talking, Tahora, unclean, the words clean in Tuma and Tahara. And I thought because the Kohanes were the priests, in order to do the rituals, they couldn't have any depression or grief. They had to be clear. So being connected to the dead is part of Tuma of grief,
well,
rather than just about afterlife.
I heard Shlomo Carlebach say that. You know, how can you serve God when you see pain and grief? It's a nice midrash. You know, it's true and it's not true, because you need to be able to serve God being with people in the pain of life too. Shoshana, you get a comment, and then we're going to go back to another.
You did something really fast now, like in terms of the history of religion. I just wanted to slow you down for just a second because it was so powerful. This ambivalence in later biblical religion towards the afterlife, I felt like you were saying is connected to the same people who were goddess worshiping. So what I hear from that is centering religion in life-giving and death, like the womb that births people and the womb that takes people back maybe to be rebirthed. That guild and that belief was seen by, in the later period as like, we don't want to do that. We don't want to center ourselves there anymore.
Was problematic, and I'm going to go to the next slide. I'll show you that even that kept changing. I'm trying to give you, the good news is, I spent 10, 15 years reading all the afterlife material I can get my hands on. The bad news is I spent 10, 15 years reading that, and I got an hour and a half to try to do some of that now.
Yeah, I know.
But here's what will explain it a little bit is the theology of the ancient world. In the theology of the ancient world, there were three realms. It wasn't yet the Hubble telescope. So there was the realm of the God, the human realm, and the realm of the dead. I mean, you can look in other cultures. So the word for the underworld is Sheol. So there's three different Sheol texts, and I'm gonna present to you 500 years of Jewish theology around the underworld. So Shoshana, you get the first one is an early text. Read it, and then I'll comment.
Okay.
An amoral underworld realm on the left.
Okay. An amoral underworld realm, says Jacob, if any harm came to him, to Binyamin, on the journey you are to undertake, you would send me down to Sheol with my white head bowed in grief. So
there's no punishment. It's not for the bad. It's not for the wicked. It's simply the underworld.
It's where I'll go if I die.
That's where they all go. Samuel was in the underworld. Jacob goes to the underworld. It's simply, you're alive, you're here. When you're dead, you go to Sheol. As things change, it gets to be more of a problematic realm. This is post-exilic already.
So in Yeshayahu, your magnificence has been flung down to Sheol, underneath a bed of maggots, and over you a blanket of worms.
Okay, now here's the next quote that people often quote. What it is when I'm giving you a thumbnail sketch. I'm sorry to be brief on this one, but as monotheism developed, there was a kind of shutting off of the realm of the dead. So then you get this in Ecclesiastes.
A realm of silence. The living know that they shall die, but the dead know nothing, nor do they have any more reward, for the memory of them is forgotten.
Okay, here's the truth, folks. Teachings on afterlife in Jewish tradition are very complex. This is somebody asked me this question at the very beginning. Was it you? I don't know whether it was Cynthia or Helena. You asked me this question. There's a multiplicity of views. It's not a Jewish view. There are Jewish views of the afterlife, but as you will see when we do this next week and in the following week, there's certainly a very clear template of the stages of the journey. I'm giving you a little bit of the background so we can go forward, because you can't understand the rabbinic teaching on Gehenna without understanding some of what they said about Sheol. You might have to read a little bit more. I don't want to throw too much at you, but I also want to be rich in what we're doing. So I'm looking at the time. I'll take a question, a couple of texts down the road. Let me keep going. I'm assuming you're with me. I don't want to lose you in the afterlife. Okay, so here's also part of the problem. This is in a whole other quality. The biblical authors were more concerned about the fate of the entire nation. They hadn't been through the Renaissance. They hadn't been through individual therapy. They didn't have existential angst about meaning of. They didn't say, "Oh, what's the meaning of my life?" You don't see those kind of texts in biblical tradition. They're asking, what's going to be the fate of the Israelites? Are we going to be in relationship with God, or are we going to not be in relationship with God? They didn't have the same anxiety. I haven't even read most of your therapy notes, but I know that you probably have that kind of anxiety because the individualism that comes after the Renaissance is hardwired into our DNA. It was not in the DNA of our biblical ancestors. They were more concerned what was going to happen to the collectivity of Israel at the end of time. So you see a lot of stuff like this. The word eschatology, hang on, the word eschatology is one of those words that scholars throw around like a basketball. It basically means teachings at the end of days. So why don't you sing, Shoshana, the last line in Hebrew, and then you'll go back because people know that melody. You're muted. Hang on.
Okay.
Ki
mitzion tetzei Torah udvar Adonai miYerushalayim. Ki mitzion tetzei Torah udvar Adonai miYerushalayim. And it shall come to pass in the last days that the mountain of God, of Yahweh's house, shall be established on top of the mountains and shall be exalted above the hills. And all the nations shall float unto it. And many people shall go and say, "Come, let us go up to the mountain of God, to the house of God, of the God of Yaakov. And he will teach us his ways, so that we may walk in his paths." For out of Zion
shall go Torah, and
the word of God from Yerushalayim.
Okay, that's, believe it or not, that's an afterlife text, but it's about the fate of the afterlife at the end of time, which takes me to the next text. This is the last one we're going to do in biblical period. This is am I allowed to use the word seminal anymore? This is go. Are you willing to read this if I tell you it's a seminal text? Go on. Okay.
Certainly. The resurrection in the book of Daniel, there shall be a time of trouble, such as never was since there was a nation, till that same time. And at that time your people shall be delivered, everyone who shall be found written in the book. And many of those who sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to everlasting life, some to shame and everlasting contempt.
Some to everlasting life, some to shame and contempt. So what do you have here? What do you have in this text?
The early views of some shreds of heaven and hell that will be taken up by Greeks and Christians later?
Yeah, you for the first time you have a two-tiered world. You have two options. You either the elevator goes up or the elevator goes down. This is the early and only text in Tanakh that is alluding to a notion of reward for the righteous and punishment for the wicked. And it's not immediately after death, it's at the end of time and history. This is an apocalyptic text. This is a text about what will happen at the time of the resurrection. So what we want to say, and this is the last biblical text, but we want to say in biblical period, there are some allusions to a notion of survival of consciousness after death. There's a concern about the collectivity of Israel, and then they're seeding the notion of reward and punishment that gets picked up later in rabbinic tradition. There's a lot more in there, but that's what I can give you in 48 minutes of a summary of biblical tradition. Anybody have any questions? Because we're about to swim in Talmud and Midrash. Yeah, please, Marla.
I have a question. The part about from Torah about the anyone who practices divination or sorcery or interprets omens, witchcraft, yada yada. I wonder, was the banishment of magic, was that done primarily to set Israel apart? Like, we're not going to do this because that's what all these other people did and we have to be different? Or was it because they actually thought there was something about that was like wrong?
Well,
or maybe even something else.
When I was 13 and started smoking cigarettes, my father blamed my cousin. So sometimes we blame it on the neighbors. We blame it on the Canaanites. But these were Hebrew Israelite practices that were progressively weeded out because it was seen as antithetical to the one God, Yud-He Vav-He. But winners write history. So it was, as history evolved, there was a progressive weeding that out. And so it was seen as against God's commandments, but not originally. But biblical tradition is 1,000 years of Jewish history. So it changed over time in history. Anyone else? A comment, question?
What is the reason we say Kaddish, bonus Kaddish for 11 months? I thought that had to do something
Steve,
with...
hold that question. You got a good question. If I go there, I'm not going to do what I need to do. I promise you we're going to spend time on Kaddish. Yeah, let me. Okay, Shoshana, you get a word, and then I'm going to give you more text.
I just want to say some of these magical practices have never stopped among the Jewish people.
Right.
They have never ever stopped, and they will keep going.
Good. So and you will see, in fact, as we go along, the whole issue of folk tradition is still in there. The rabbi said one thing, but the folk had a very different sense, and that's where I'm going to come in for a landing on today. I still got a little bit of time to swim through 1,000 years of rabbinic midrash. Okay, so this is what we're doing now. We're doing rabbinic Judaism. If these words are not familiar in your vocabulary, it would be good to get them in. Mishnah is post-biblical Jewish law. It's codified in the 2nd century. Talmud is the commentary on the Mishnah, and that's sort of 5th, 6th century. And then Midrash is legendary commentary on the Torah. That's all I want to say. So the texts that we're going to do come from the 3 of those places. Okay, so here's a new concept that comes in. Olam haba. Put up your hands if you've heard Olam haba before. Okay, often people use Olam haba to talk about afterlife. It's not so simple. But Olam haba is understood to be, well, actually, let's read it. Shoshana, read the first text, please.
Okay.
Top of the page.
The world to come. Rav Yaakov said, Olam Hazeh is like a vestibule before the Olam Haba. Prepare yourself in the vestibule that you may enter into the banquet hall.
Okay, I'm not going to stop my screen share because I want to do all 3 of these. But so somebody comment. So what is that one saying? Olam Hazeh is this world. So what's the relationship between this world and the world to come?
Adjacent.
Preparation. It's just preparation. It's like a vestibule. You know, like you got to come into my house, you got to go through the mudroom to get into the kitchen, right? It's prepare yourself in the vestibule so you really enter into the banquet hall. Now, I want you to read the next two.
Very surprising, right? We live our lives as if this is the main drama, but it's a shocker.
It's not, even that's not so simple. Read the one on the left.
And further, he used to say, that 1 hour of repentance and good works in Olam Hazeh, the whole life of Olam Haba.
Hold it. You're getting me confused, Shoshana. Maybe read the one on the right.
Better is 1 hour of bliss in Olam Haba than the whole of life in Olam Hazeh.
If I understood, wait, better is 1 hour of repentance in this world than the whole of the world to come, and better is 1 hour of bliss in the world to come than all of life in this world. So wait, am I confused? Are you confused? Okay, so
there are two awesome things.
Wait, let me just say this. The same guy said those two things. It was this is a Jewish Zen koan. He's saying, Olam Hazeh, you can do tshuva and you can do repentance in 1 minute, and Olam Haba, it's fantastic. So what we have here, what I use these texts to say is that in Jewish tradition, there was never really a sense of primacy of the world to come vis-a-vis this world. They lived in a juxtaposition to each other. Okay, in parts of Christian understanding, this world is like almost in Hinduism, this world is all Maya. It's a transcendent realm. In Judaism, there's a strange juxtaposition of the two, because it's in this world we do the mitzvot. It's in this world that we can do tshuva, and there is a world to come. When it takes place, where it is, that's a whole other issue. Anyone, a comment? We're going to swim in Olam Haba. I promised you I wasn't going to leave you in Gehenna, so I have to do some text quickly.
I just want to say his words in another way. Like, the great thing about being incarnate and in this world is this is where you can make transformation happen, right? And that's the purpose of all these relationships and mitzvot and repentance. And the great thing about the next world is it's very blissful there. But you can't make fixings there.
Well, it's interesting because, in the history of modern Judaism, a lot of Jews are not religious Jews, but they're social activists. So that there is a sense of, let's keep working for transforming this world and doing our tshuva in this world. And that doesn't mean we don't believe in life after death. That's the misinterpretation of that. Okay. Let's see. Okay, so we're going next to. Okay, so then the question that I want you to ask is, when will Olam Haba take place? Right, because that's the term, Olam Haba. So if you thought the earlier stuff was confusing, this is even more confusing. It's my job to make it clear, but it's confusing. Okay, Shoshana, please read this one.
This is from the Gemara, the Bavli, Ketubot 111b, right? Not like this world will be the world to come. In this world, one has the trouble to harvest grapes and press them. But in Olam Haba, in the world to come, a person will bring a single grape in a wagon or a ship, store it in the corner of his house, and draw from it enough wine to fill a large flagon.
Whatever that is.
There will not be a grape which will not yield 30 measures of wine.
When will Olam Haba take place? at the end of time and history when we have a redeemed world. This is an age of super technology. That's why I had fun creating this image, right? But this is not talking about the moment of death. Olam haba here doesn't say very much about death. It says eventually we'll have this transformed world, we'll have the super technology, we'll have these great ability, we'll have hydroponics, and we'll, the Israeli agriculture will have become ubiquitous throughout the planet, and we'll have a much better life. Yes, you with me? Just nod. So I can only see about 5 of you at this time, right? Okay, but then we get this one. Shoshana.
Okay. This is from the Midrash, so Sifri and then Exodus Rabbah. My Torah will guide you in your path in this world. It will watch over you in your sleep at the hour of death. When you wake up, it will converse with you in Olam Haba. That's cool. The story is told that when Rabbi Abahu was about to depart from this life, he beheld all the good things that were stored up for him in Olam Haba, and he rejoiced.
Okay, so when is Olam Haba according to this text? It's after death. I wish I can send you a screen share of your confused faces. It's beautiful to see. So what I'm really teaching you to understand what's problematic in our tradition is that Olam Haba is sometimes understood to be the end of time and history, and sometimes it's understood to be what happens after death. Okay? And sometimes, and at least need to understand that. I mean, you could read a lot more in my book, but I want you to understand that that's part of the legacy that we have inherited. So sometimes people say Olam Haba, and we don't know exactly what it means. But at least in this case, to see that there are that term is often fused and confused in rabbinic tradition. What I wanted to say, now we're going to go to commercial, but next, before we go to commercial break, you see what's coming up next week. The Kabbalists clarify this, okay? So you can relax. You don't have to get your furrowed brow. You just want to take it in and realize that we've only been at this an hour, and I've thrown all kinds of texts at you. You're doing great. So hang on, let's go back to. Okay, now we're jumping ahead to the time of Nachmanides. Nachmanides was sort of a 12th, 13th century philosopher, a shtickle Kabbalist, and this particular text is going to help you understand everything that we've looked at about Olam Haba to date. So go.
Okay. In any case, concerning the meaning of Olam Haba, we have learned that it is a world in which the body, the sanctuary, and its vessels will be present.
In other words, what Nachmanides is saying, with regard to Olam Haba, that's going to be when we re-envision a messianic realm, and we'll have the resurrection of the dead, and we'll have a rebuilt temple, and all that. Remember, that's the original messianic vision. But, he now says,
but it is not Olam HaNeshamot, the world of souls, in which everyone receives their due immediately after death.
Okay. This is, if I have to say it myself, I think this is one of the most important concepts to help you understand. We need, so Shana, I'm saying this to you because you do a lot of teaching and other, we need to reclaim that term Olam HaNeshamot, the world of souls. Because by the time the Kabbalists come along, they fill in the details on the status of consciousness in Olam HaNeshamot. They're not so much concerned, well, they're concerned in some ways about resurrection, the end of time, but they fill in a lot more details on what happens in the world of souls. So in fact, I find that a more helpful term than Olam Haba, because Olam Haba is sort of maybe this or maybe that. But I just jumped 500 years. So we still use this term Olam Haba in lots of different ways. But what you'll see when we do the Kabbalistic stuff next week, it's much, much clearer. Comments, questions. I got a half hour to take you through a few more realms. Yeah, Bob.
So could you clarify the difference between the world of souls, called Neshamot, and Olam Haba?
Well,
Because it's not quite clear.
In some ways, it's the same. When Olam Haba refers to a post-mortem realm, it's the same as Olam HaNeshamot. But what Nachmanides is saying is, no. It's more helpful to talk about the world of souls as the journey of consciousness after death, and Olam Haba as that post-transhistorical messianic realm. So if you want me to cleave the difference between the two, that's what I say. But Jewish tradition doesn't make that doesn't make that so clear. The rabbis didn't have to standardize this stuff. There's no tractate on afterlife.
And one other related question to that: does time exist in Olam Haba, passage of time?
It's going to take me an hour to answer that question. We're victims of 3D reality, and we're victims of gravity. We think up and down. Okay, you're in Syracuse, right? Are you? Who was in Syracuse? Schenectady, right? So I said to Bob, I remember Channel 7 from Schenectady. Most of you will remember television when you walked up to the television and you putzed around the dial from Channel 2 to Channel 13, right? And then there was UHF, where we went from Channel 14 to Channel 99. Occasionally you got some got through the snow, and now there's cable, and then there's 1,000 channels ubiquitously being transmitted through satellite. So most of us are still perceiving reality at channels 2 to 13, and these transcendent realms that the Witch of Endor and 1-900 Psychic and others can get to are not always in the same realm. It points to I'll put in, like in the chat room, a question about Kaddish and why we say it for 11 months, because I think the issue of time is relevant, but we're going to keep going back to Olam HaNeshamot. So let's go. Okay, so I want to show you.
I have a question too. Maybe quick, maybe not. In a text that you read to us a little while ago, and now I'm trying to remember where it may have been the last biblical text, I don't remember, but it talked about being written in the book. It was the book of Daniel. Yeah. Two questions. One, is that the first place where we get that, which tradition I think clearly reinscribes every Yamim Ha'im? And secondly, is that a sort of a cure, or but if you get written in the book, then that will help mitigate whether you go up or down, is that where
this whole thing is based on reward and punishment and just, divine justice and all that. It's so it becomes increasingly complex. Yeah, the whole thing is, if you think this is complex, it gets increasingly complex. But it diversifies, and so but underneath that is an assumed belief, and we're still fighting through that one today, of justice in the world. I'll leave that at that, and let's go. Okay, so Gehenna. So I want to show you at least some other concepts in rabbinic tradition, because the Kabbalists pick up on this and they interpret it in very different ways. So there is this notion of Gehenna. It's based on a biblical term of Gei Ben Hinnom, the valley of the sons of Hinnom. If you've been to Jerusalem, it's where the Cinematheque is. It was said to be the realm where there was child sacrifice. And read the top one, Shoshana, please. Oh, no, wait, have I shared my screen? Yeah.
Yeah, I can see it, and I'm unmuted. There are 7 names for Gehenna: Sheol, Abaddon, or destruction; Be'er Shachat, or corruption; Bor Sha'on, or horrible pit; and
Tita Yavein.
Eb Hayen. And what is that word? Mir clay?
Myri clay.
Tzalmavet, or shadow of death, and Eretz Hatachtit, netherworld, which is a tradition received at Mount Sinai.
Wait a minute. What's Gehenna? It's all of those things. Again, they're not standardizing it. They use different names, and I could show you other midrashim. I could show you other midrashim that use different names. But the next two quotes are really going to highlight what I think becomes central in the whole Jewish understanding of afterlife. Go.
This is from Midrash. Mishlei. What should one do to escape the judgment of Gehenna? Occupy oneself with good deeds.
You want to avoid Gehenna, do mitzvahs. You know, Gehenna is the realm of punishment. You want to avoid the realm of punishment, act morally and ethically in the world. The rabbis were not predominantly transcendentalists. They were ethicists. They used Gehenna as a carrot and a stick. They said, you want to avoid Gehenna? Study Torah, give money to tzedakah, visit the sick, take care of the poor. That was their morality. And they said something else which was very different than St. Augustine.
The judgment of the generation of the flood lasted 12 months in Gehenna.
It begins to point towards the practice of Kaddish. Why we only say Kaddish for 11 months. I'm going to keep your curiosity up on that one for a little while longer. But there's a notion of an underworld of punishment. There's not a notion of eternal damnation. The generation of the flood, the generation of the spies, maybe they get eternal damnation. But most of us, Benoni, middle of the road Jews, we only get Gehenna for a maximum of 12 months.
So, Simcha, like the first text here, or the second text, is perhaps an argument like against karmic or aesthetic. In other words, the reasons why you might be in Gehenna, like maybe later on in Kabbalah, could be like you did sins in another life, and now you have your life is not so great in this one. Even though you're a tzaddik, you're doing great things. Like that's a fight against that.
You know what? This is a longer conversation, but you're pointing to it because there was actually conflict when reincarnation comes onto the scene in the 12th century. There was a conflict. Do you reincarnate because you're a sinner, or do you go to Gehenna? And there are different points of view on that one. But I stopped my screen share. I want to go back to the last text at the bottom of the page. Can you see it? It was my...
Now I can see it. After going down to Gehenna and receiving the punishment due him, the sinner is forgiven from all their iniquities. And like an arrow from the bow, he is flung forth from Gehenna.
There's hope for you, folks. There's hope for you. Okay, but again, this is the central theology of the rabbis that we have inherited. Some of the stuff we don't harvest in the same way, but because of the connection, which I'll talk about next week, between Gehenna and Kaddish, this is an important piece. There's no eternal damnation. Though I have to say, as a therapist, people say, the maximum length of time of Gehenna is 12 months. And as a therapist, I have clients saying, well, my parents should have gotten 36 months in Gehenna, right? But at least that's the understanding of the rabbinic world. Here's where I'm going with this. I want you to at least understand where it comes from. We're going to look at the Kabbalistic stuff that is much more psychological, and then we're going to talk about contemporary applications. So I'm trying to take this out of the historical into practice, but it's going to take me a little bit of time to do that. So for the sake of time, let me throw a couple of more images at you. And so Gan Eden is another realm. Okay, Gehenna and Gan Eden. So what's Gan Eden? Read this one.
And this is Numbers Rabbah, again, Rabbinic Midrash. In Olam Haba, the Holy Blessed One will prepare a banquet for the righteous in Gan Eden.
They're actually
There will
conflating Gan Eden and Olam Haba. They're not. They weren't asking our questions for clarity. They were having a good time expounding whatever they wanted to. Go.
And there will be no need to provide balsam or perfumes, because a north wind and a south wind will sweep through and sprinkle all the romantic plants of Gan Eden so that they will yield their fragrance.
You know, there's an article out recently that they discovered some cannabis in ancient Israel. And it makes me think that I was a high priest in a past lifetime, right? They were just, they were envisioning, they were having a good time. This was their myth making. They were living under Roman domination. Later, they were living in Babylonia. They had reasonable quality of life, but not all that.
In Babylonia, they're influenced by Zoroastrianism.
Zoroastrian, right? So, and Zoroastrianism has a lot of stuff about paradise, and right. So this is one of the many notions of Gan Eden. But here's another one. This is very different. Look at what I want to show you is, they go back and forth. So this is a famous one about Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. He's on his deathbed and he says,
there are two ways before me, two paths. One is headed towards Gan Eden and the other to Gehenna. I do not know by which I shall be taken. But that's amazing, given his life, given what he did. He creates the rabbinic, he saves the rabbinic movement, but he might be a traitor to the majority of the Jewish people who were believed that the rebellion was much more important, to throw off Rome was more important. That's fascinating.
I don't want to take you all into a cryptic conversation, but Yochanan ben Zakkai is a first century rabbi who really sets the template moving out of Jerusalem into the yeshiva, into learning. And at the end of his life, he says, maybe I made a mistake. So I don't know. Maybe there's a sense of humility. Maybe we should all be able to say, I did the best I could. I don't know which way it's all going to end. I don't know which way it's all going to end. But I know that this. Okay, I got a few more minutes. Okay, before I like to keep stopping and hearing your comments, your questions. So please, if anybody has any comments or questions, I'm gonna.
I just have a comment that if the maximum time you're gonna do in the bad side of the underworld is 1 year, there's not much of a disincentive for straying from the path or, not doing mitzvot. If the maximum time is you're not going to burn in hell forever, which is not a Jewish concept, but.
Well, it's interesting to ask how much of their theology was in response to the world around them too. But I want to speak of it in its own terms, not in a kind of polemic for or against Christianity. I think the essential value that we want to extract out of this is the notion of tshuva always being a possibility. I did some teaching on Sinai recently. And there's a midrash about one of the things that was created before the creation of the world was tshuva. In other words, for those of you, repentance, the possibility of self-betterment. So the possibility of self-betterment is hardwired into the human condition. So I don't know, maybe they were emphasizing live a good life and be willing to do tshuva. And that's the most important thing. I'm not sure. This leaves room for lots of speculation. I'm sort of trying to discern this as we go along. Okay. Another comment, question? Because I still have a couple of more show and tell pictures for you. Okay. Let's see. Share. And I have to go this. Okay, so then, okay, now we're going into heaven. Okay, so this is beginning to look like, you know, sort of, so we're going to see next week, we're going to see some Dante-esque stuff. This looks like the notions of heaven that we've kind of assimilated into our culture that's really based upon Christian Renaissance art. Our images of heaven and hell are more based on Christian Renaissance art than they are on rabbinic midrash. And this Yalkut Shimoni is a later, like 11th, 12th century midrashic text. Shoshana?
Okay, I've unmuted. Gan Eden has two gates of ruby, two gates of ruby, by which stand 60 myriads of ministering angels. Wow. The ruby gates. The luster of the face of each of them glistens like the splendor of the firmament. When a righteous person arrives, they divest him in white robes of the clouds of glory. Cool. Set two crowns upon his head, one made of gems and pearls and the other of gold. Each person has a chamber allotted to him by himself, according to the honor due him.
In other words, depending on what quality of your mitzvah practice, depends on what quality of heavenly realm you get. You know, as I like to say, you know, how much money do you have in your Gan Eden account? Are you going to be able to afford a Motel 6 or a Best Western, or if you're a little Kabbalist, you get a Best Western, or you know, or a Hilton, or a penthouse, or you know, or like Shoshana, an apartment overlooking Central Park, right? Okay, so here's the interesting thing, and it sort of alludes to where the Kabbalists take this stuff. Divesting him in white robes of the crowds of glory. We're going to see a text next week where in heaven they take off your terrestrial garments and they put on your celestial garments. So for the Kabbalists, Gan Eden becomes a place where you've worked through your incarnational karma, and then you have your soul karma. But that's already a whole other framework for looking at this stuff. But we needed to have this as a background in order to go the next place with it. I have to be careful using the next place, but you know what I'm talking about. Okay, now there's one other concept that is central to Rabbinic Judaism that I haven't even mentioned. I want to just say that this is Gila Rachel Raphael's art, and it's one of her future Shekhinah oracle cards. Okay, on the left, please.
Okay, so we're into Techiyat HaMeitim, resurrection of the dead. There is no section of the Torah which does not imply the doctrine of resurrection, but we have not the capacity to expound it in this sense.
So this was for reasons I don't understand. Reb Zalman writes in the foreword, the first edition of my book, he says, "Do I really believe that the crypts will rise up at the end of time? There may be some deeper mythic understanding about our transcending our fear of death. I don't know what that's about. But if we're just seeing it in their own worldview, for some reason, they took this idea of resurrection very seriously. And on the right,
since a person repudiated belief in the resurrection of the dead, they will have no share in the resurrection."
Now, how's that for writing control into the texts? We believe this, and if you don't believe it, you're not going to get a piece of the action. Okay, and this and let Elisheva read this one because she had mentioned it earlier. Go, Elisheva.
Unmute yourself.
The Holy One, the Holy Blessed One, will burrow the earth before them, and their bodies will roll through excavation like bottles. And when they arrive at the land of Israel, their soul will be reunited to them.
Okay. Anybody want to explain this to me? You see,
I don't, but another image came up to me, especially looking at Gila Raisel's art, which you didn't mention was Ezekiel's Valley of the Bones. That the dry
no, that's the
bones
earlier tradition of it, right? In a longer study, had we just done biblical stuff today, we would have included that. That's where it starts from. That's where it starts from. And when in Ezekiel, it's metaphoric. It's like we've just been in exile and the nation will come back, and it also picks up the Zoroastrian tradition of they would leave bodies out in the Tower of Silence, and there were a lot of dead bones in there. I can't interpret all of this stuff, but at least to understand that resurrection was very much part of the whole rabbinic tradition. Okay, I got 7 minutes, and I promised I wasn't going to leave you in Gehenna. So at least we got that one down. Let's see what else shows up before we come in for a landing. Okay, hang on. I gotta move that away and go to. All right. So now I want to show you the kind of stuff that begins to show up when we start talking more about Olam HaNeshamot. So besides, I needed to give you like the structural basis of Jewish understanding. And now what we're going to fill in is more on the visionary stuff about what happens at the moment of death and beyond, because I think that's the more interesting stuff for contemporary practical applications. But if I only started with that, I wouldn't be doing full justice to our tradition. So go.
Visions of the after death journey. As they are about to depart from the world, the righteous are shown the reward rightfully due to them, and they rejoice in such sublime vision. And this is Exodus Rabbah 53. So they're talking about something in the Torah, but they're riffing off of, I don't know what.
But exactly, a lot of what they're doing is riffing off the Torah. But what they're saying is there's some sense of a sublime vision at the moment of death. Oh, that's interesting. What's that stuff we've been reading about near-death experiences? It's very interesting how there's a lot of this stuff from here on in begins to pick up some of the stuff of near-death experiences. How about this one? This is similar.
Okay. What was that last text? Exodus Rabbah 53 what?
I think it was 52, 3. Do you have the text?
Yeah, I do, but I'm going to be looking at that after we end. When a person departs to their eternal home, all their deeds are enumerated before them, and they are told, quote, such and such a thing have you done in such and such a place on that day, end quote. Admitting to the justice of the verdict, the individual then signs the record shown to them saying, rightly have you judged me.
Now, if I may comment on this image, if you go to Reb Google, it's amazing what kind of stuff you find. But we have that phrase in our language. I saw my life flash before my eyes. We have it in near-death experience literature where people have a panoramic vision of all their deeds. Today, there's more resuscitation technology than any other point in human history, but this is like 5th century Babylonia. So I'm not sure where they got their stuff, but some of them were visionary and they saw this stuff. I just said earlier they were ethicists, but some of them certainly were evolved beings who were able to get channel 99 and channel 1012. Okay.
And notice notice the editor doesn't think that this is something you can't write publicly.
Well, I think it goes back to the sense of your record being in the book or something like that. It's like maybe you have to you see it and it's like you get it. It's like so that's what my life was all about. That's why I had to suffer. That's why I made those mistakes. I see that now. One more.
That was a big text. It is said of the angel of death that he is full of eyes. When a sick person is about to depart, he stands above the head pillow with his sword drawn out of his hand and a drop of gall hanging on it. As the sick person beholds it, they tremble and opens their mouth in fright. He then drops it into their mouth. It is from this that the person dies, from this that the corpse deteriorates, from this that their face becomes greenish.
Okay, look, we can spend a lot of time with this. You know, we have the image of the Grim Reaper. You know, you know, look, people weren't living to 95 years old on ventilators in hospitals. You know, and this was one of their many images. When Moses dies, he dies with the kiss of God. When Miriam dies, she doesn't die with the kiss of God. You know why? God kissing Moses was a little too sexy for them. So Miriam dies with the kiss of Shekhinah. Check that out in your text. You'll see that. Okay, so I'm going to skip this, but I'm going to end here. Okay, so this is my last text, and we'll take a couple of minutes if we need to go over. If you need to check out, I don't know if my image. So okay, so here actually let me go back a second because I think it's worth it to comment. I actually can't go back now. I don't know. It doesn't matter. Oh yeah, this is what I want to say. Folk religion. I mentioned that. So the rabbis were talking about Olam Haba and Techiyat HaMeitim and and all of this stuff, and the folk were doing the following. Read this.
Okay, this is in Joshua Trachtenberg's book, Jewish Magic, right? A man who fell asleep in a shul and was locked in by the shamish and awoke to find himself in the midst of a spirit congregation. To his amazement, he discerned the forms of two men who were still among the living. Sure enough, within a few days, these two passed away.
I heard there was a tradition when you walked into the shul in the morning, you knocked on the door because they knew that's where the spirits congregated overnight. So what you end up having here is almost like a whole other reality of what the people were seeing in their daily life. The rabbis were talking much more philosophically, but people were living with people dying. People were dying in the home. People were having apparitions. People were seeing some sense of an interconnection between the worlds. And where we're going is that we need the Kabbalistic vision to be able to help us understand the reality of how people live and die and what meaning making we need to make in our own life with regard to dying and death. Good. So it's 5:30. I ended on time, but if you want to stay and ask me a couple of more questions or comments, if you need to go, at least I'm respecting your time. But so good. I thank you. I thank you, Shoshana. Let's thank Shoshana. She did a great job as our co-editor, as our co-reader, even with her New York accent. New York Yiddishist.
Yeah. In my father's shtetl in Poland, he said that the shul among the Christian Poles was considered haunted. They wouldn't touch it. They wouldn't go in it. They walked across the street. And it wasn't about anti-Semitism. It was folk beliefs. The shul had so much energy, like karmic energy.
No, I think the folk stuff is very, very interesting. So if any of you want to study this a little bit further, this book here, Jewish Magic and Superstition, this is an older version of it. But there's stuff in here on amulets and angels and demons and war with spirits and stuff like that. So there's a lot of very interesting stuff on that. Though I recommend this one, Jewish Views in the Afterlife. All right. Another comment, question, and then please, Debbie.
Yeah, this is just an observation. It was in the plate that you created for number 11 about Gehenna and the Rabbinic worldview, using the Hieronymus Bosch's The Garden of Earthly Delights as the background for it. I
Good
just,
eye.
I was, huh?
Good eye.
Well, it's impressive to see the original at the Prado in Madrid. But yeah, because I was trying to figure out, was it really interpreted as being that bad? But when I go back and read the 7 names, then yeah,
Yeah,
it's,
wait till we get
it
to head
definitely
stuff
is
next
equated.
week. I think I used that same image, but
Yeah, that was my
okay.
observation myself.
All right, I think we did what we needed to do here today. So may we all? Yeah, okay. One more, Michael.
Oh, it's just a detail question. What is the Trachtenberg reference? And
Jewish
one of
magic
the
and superstition.
sites says K-E-T-H. K-E-T-H. I was wondering what
Oh,
those both
it's
are.
the Palestinian Talmud, Ketubot.
Oh, thank you. Okay. And Trachtenberg?
Trachtenberg, Jewish magic and superstition.
Oh, that book you showed. Okay, gret. Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you
folks.
very much.
I think we did it. Thank you all. You've been great, and we'll have some more show and tell slides next week.
Make sure you save the recording. You know how to save the recording after this is over?
No, how do I save the recording?
So it's gonna give you a screen where it downloads itself. So you have to wait through to the Zoom. It takes about a minute, a couple of minutes. So as soon as you leave the room, don't close out. Leave the room, and then you'll see, the Zoom screen come up, and it sort of has a little blue line as it's sort of recording the recording or whatever it does. Because I've lost recordings that way. So be careful when you leave the room that you leave the
so
screen
much.
on, and then you'll be able to play that. Okay. Thank you so much for recording.
Okay.
See you next.
Folks.
Bye.